Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Hello, computer. There we go. Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bill in mid-Missouri, Karen in Northern California, Bella in Florida, Paul in the Great Northwest, Shauna in Canada, Melissa in Great Neck, Shandora in the Bronx, Lucy in Minnesota, Frank in San Pedro, Jonathan in SoCal, Guy in Ohio, David in Indiana, Joanne in Somerset, Texas. Welcome, Joanne. Marjorie in Georgia, Belle in Texas. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Gerald Gregory Timms for the healing of Lindsay H. May Lindsay have a refuah shlema, a complete healing of mind, body, and spirit. We say amen. And Gerald, thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And the merit of that, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Our daf is page 19 here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. We're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 7 here in chapter 1. And we're continuing to talk about one who finds documents in the marketplace and whether we can return them or not. So the Gemara discusses the matter cited above. If one found a woman's gett, a gett is a bill of divorce. If one found a woman's gett in a case when the husband admits that he wrote it and that he gave it, right? That's important because a husband might write a gett and then reconsider and never give it to his wife. So the fact that he wrote it means nothing. Okay, he wrote a gett. He's prepared if he ever wants to divorce his wife. But until he gives it to her, the couple is a couple, they're not divorced. Once he hands it to her and she receives it, then they are divorced. And that's why you can't be so quick if you find a gett in the marketplace to give it to the woman who is named therein. But if the husband says, yes, I wrote that gett, and yes, I gave it to my wife, who's now my ex-wife, then why not give it to her? She needs that gett in case she's ready to remarry and someone asks her to prove that she's no longer married to her previous husband. So why wouldn't you give it to her? Very interesting. So if one found a woman's gett in the marketplace in a case when the husband admits that he wrote it and he gave it to her, then the finder must return it to the wife. If the husband does not admit to this, then the finder may neither return it to this one nor that one, meaning not the husband or the wife. So in any event, this Baraisa states that when the husband admits that he wrote and gave it, the finder must return it to the wife. And the Gemara challenges this. But let us suspect that perhaps he wrote the gett intending to give it to her in Nisan, right? That's next month, the month that contains Passover, but did not give it to her until Tishrei, which is 7 months away, the month that contains Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But he did not give it to her until Tishrei. Why would this matter? Because the husband in that case went and sold the produce of his wife's property in the interim between Nisan and Tishrei, since the divorce had not yet taken effect. And the wife might then produce the bill of divorce, the gett, which he wrote in Nisan, and come to repossess the produce from the purchasers unlawfully, right? So if a woman brings property like a field into a marriage, so that's going to remain her property. But as long as she and her husband are married, then because the husband has the obligation to sustain his wife, in return, he receives the right to the produce of that property. So she brought a farm field into the marriage. So every year the husband can work the field, grow the produce, and sell the produce. But once he divorces her, then she leaves the marriage with that field that she brought into the marriage. And obviously the husband has no right to the produce of that field. So it might be that he wrote this gett in Nisan, but he didn't give it to her until Tishrei. And so since he didn't give it to her, they're still married. He has the rights to that produce, and he sold it to whoever he sold it to. If later she comes around and says, well, this is the gett that my husband wrote in Nisan, and she goes to the buyer of that produce and says, my husband had no right to sell this to you, my ex-husband had no right to sell this to you, it's mine, and she could seize it. And if you have a problem with that, go get your money back from my ex-husband. So that's the concern with a gett that was written in Nisan but not given to the wife until Tishrei. Now, this works out well according to the one who says that once he has decided to divorce her, the husband no longer has the rights to his wife's produce. Since the husband has no right to sell the produce, the wife repossessed it rightfully. But according to the view, the one who says that the husband has rights to his wife's produce until the actual time of giving the gett, then what is there to say? And we were kind of assuming that view, that he doesn't have the right to that he has the right to the produce until he actually gives her the gett. There is a view that as soon as he writes a gett, or at least has made a firm decision to divorce, at that moment he loses the right to her produce, even if he hasn't yet given her the gett. But we're following this other view that he certainly has the right to the produce until he actually gives the gett. So the Gemara answers, so then why would we be so quick as to return this gett to her if it could produce, this unlawful seizure of the produce that was sold to a third party? So the Gemara answers, when she comes to repossess the produce, we say to her, meaning we, the rabbinic court, first bring proof as to when the gett came into your possession, and then we will allow you to repossess the sold produce. And the Gemara asks, but in what way is it different from promissory notes, right? Both promissory notes and a gett, that in this case is used to repossess produce, or a ketubah, in other words, documents that produce a liability, that we have to be very careful when we're going to hand them back to the alleged or the apparent owner of the document, right? But in what way is it different from promissory notes? As we learned in the Mishna on page 12b, with regard to one who found promissory notes, if they include a property guarantee for the loan, the finder may not return them to the creditor. And we interpreted the Mishna as referring to a case where the liable party admits that he has not yet repaid the debt. And the reason that the promissory note cannot be returned is due to the possibility that perhaps he wrote it intending to borrow money in Nisan, but ultimately did not borrow it until Tishrei. And the creditor might therefore use the promissory note to unlawfully repossess property that the debtor sold between Nisan and Tishrei from the purchasers, assuming, because the creditor might assume that that property, he had a lien on it, as collateral for the unpaid debt, right? If it went unpaid. Now, since the borrower ended up borrowing the money after he sold that property, the creditor has no right to go and repossess that property, and that's why returning that promissory note to the creditor might produce that unlawful repossession of property. So if this is the same type of concept, then even if the husband admits that he wrote the gett and gave it to his wife, we shouldn't return it to her because she might do this unlawful repossession. And according to the Gemara's suggestion, with regard to a gett, there, in the case of a promissory note, it should also be returned. And when the creditor comes to repossess the debtor's property that was sold in the interim, then let the court say to him, first bring proof as to when the promissory note came into your possession. But the sages say that these two cases, the found gett and the found promissory note, are not comparable. Here, with regard to a woman's gett, the purchaser will come and demand that the wife prove when it was given to her, as he will say to himself, the fact that the sages returned the gett to her was only so that she would not dwell alone as a deserted wife. That's why she needs the gett, so she can remarry. Now that she is coming to repossess the property her husband sold to me, she should go and bring proof as to when the gett came into her possession. By contrast, in the case of the promissory note, the purchaser will not come and demand proof because he will infer from the fact that the sages returned the promissory note to him that it is obviously valid from the date that is written in it. After all, for what law did the court return it to him? It was clearly in order to repossess property with it. That's the point of the promissory note. As opposed to the gett, which frees the woman to remarry, its primary purpose is not to act as an instrument by which she might repossess produce that the husband sold after he wrote the gett and before he gave it to her from her field that she brought into the marriage. Again, quite an unusual circumstance. Promissory note being used to seize property as collateral, much more common. So the sages clarified the matter and determined that, in fact, the promissory note came into the possession of the creditor prior to the purchase of property from the debtor. At any rate, one is much more in the realm of commercial transactions. The other is more in the realm of family law, right? Marriage law. And so we should not be surprised that there are different outcomes. The sages showed that they're always willing to not push legality, but to find an interpretation of the law that will, permit a woman who is stranded to remarry, right? Either because she received a gett or is having trouble getting the gett, or because her husband, went off to war and died, and there's only one witness to his death. These are cases we've talked about in the past, but the sages really will look for a way to, not strand the woman, leaving her unable to remarry. The Mishna teaches bills of manumission of slaves, right? So another kind of found document, another kind of document that was dropped and found in the marketplace. Bills of manumission of slaves, right? The paper that frees a slave, that are found should not be returned. And the sages taught in a baraisa, if one found a bill of manumission in the marketplace, in a case when the master admits that he gave the bill to the slave, one should return it to the slave. If the master does not admit to it, one should neither return it to this person, the master, nor to that person, the slave. Now, obviously, this is, based on the ancient world when there was possession of Canaanite slaves. Slavery has not existed according to Jewish law in, many centuries. But the way the law was on the books is what we're examining. The Gemara asks, in any event, the baraisa states that when the master admits that he gave the bill of manumission to the slave, the one who found it should return it to the slave. But why should he return it? Let us suspect that perhaps he wrote the bill of manumission intending to give it to his slave in Nisan, but he did not give it to him until Tishrei. And the slave went and brought property in the interim between Nisan and Tishrei, at which time he was still a slave, in which case the property actually belongs to his master, and the master then went and sold that property. And if the bill of manumission is returned to the slave, he might produce the bill of manumission, which his master wrote in Nisan, in order to claim that the property was not his master's to sell, and repossess the property from the purchasers unlawfully. Now, this works out well according to the one who says that it is in a slave's interest to leave his master's authority and attain freedom. And in accordance with the opinion of Abaye, who says that when a document serves the interests of its intended recipient, its witnesses with their signatures acquire it on his behalf, meaning that a bill of manumission is not like a gett. A gett does not produce a divorce until the husband or his agent hands it to the wife and she receives it. By contrast, the bill of manumission, it might be that when the owner hires a scribe, writes out the bill of manumission, and the witnesses witness him signing it, then the witnesses act as an agent for the slave and acquire the bill of manumission for the slave, meaning that the slave is free from that moment, even if he's not aware of it, even if he hasn't received it into his hand yet, because it's always to the benefit of a slave to be free. So accordingly, a slave attains his freedom at the moment his bill of manumission is signed, even if it is given to him at a later date. Therefore, the law in the Baraisa works out well. But according to the one who says that it is against a slave's interest to leave his master's authority and attain freedom, what is there to say? And how could it possibly be in a slave's interest not to go free? Answer: during a famine, when the master is obligated to feed his slave. That's one example. So the Gemara answers that when the slave comes to repossess that property that ended up being sold to a third party, then the court will say to him, bring proof as to when the bill of manumission reached your possession, right? Whether you actually got it or one of the witnesses acquired it for you. And then we'll ascertain whether you can repossess that property or not. New subject. The Mishnah teaches if one found wills, right, like a will, last will and testament, or deeds of gift, the finder should not return them. And the sages taught in a Baraisa what is considered a will and is collected by the designated recipient after the death of the giver. It is a deed that states this deed will be to stand and exist as proof that if this person dies, his property is to be given to so-and-so. So an ordinary deed of gift, by contrast, is any deed in which it is written, this gift is given from today and after the death of the giver. So the Gemara asks, apparently, only if it is written in the deed from today and after the death of the giver, the recipient acquires the gift, and otherwise he does not acquire the gift. Is there no deed of gift that is effective even without the clause, and after my death? And Abaye said that this is what the Baraisa is saying. What deed of gift of a healthy person is considered like the deed of gift of a person on his deathbed? Meaning that a person on his deathbed who says, give my car to so-and-so and give my house to so-and-so, we're going to reduce the requirements, the sort of, legal requirements for making a gift, because, you can't always get the scribe and the witnesses and everything that you would rather have to make a legal transaction at the time that somebody's dying, right? So there's kind of reduced legal requirements to authenticate and validate such a gift. So Abaye is saying, so when is the gift of a healthy person considered to be as dispositive as the gift of a person on his deathbed? In that the recipient acquires it only after the death of the giver. I mean, that sounds like a will, right? But it's interesting because when they're talking about a will, the gift is from today, right? But it only is triggered after my death, right? So like a will, but not really the same as a will. It is any deed. So which one is like that? It is any deed in which it is written, this gift is given from today and after the giver's death. That's the formulation that you need for it to become effective like a deathbed gift. A deathbed gift which says after my death means that if the one on his deathbed is so fortunate as to recover from that near-death illness, well, then the gifts don't go out of his possession. He keeps them. Next subject. The Mishnah teaches that these documents may not be returned to the one who is presumed to have lost them, as perhaps the one who wrote them reconsidered and decided not to deliver them, right? The deed of gift, for example, or the will or the gett. So the Gemara infers the reason that these deeds may not be returned is that the one who wrote them doesn't say to the finder, give them to their intended recipient. In other words, the finder says, I'm not sure if I can give this to the recipient that's named in the document of gift. So I'll go to the guy who wrote it. And then the finder goes to the guy who wrote it, and the guy who wrote it says, yeah, I did write that, and I did give it to so-and-so, the recipient named therein. He must have dropped it. Feel free to give it to him, right? But if he says, give them, then the finder must give to the recipient named therein. And the Gemara raises a contradiction to that inference from a Baraisa that states that if one found wills or deeds of designated repayment or deeds of gift, even if both the one who wrote the deed and its intended recipient agree that it is valid, nevertheless, the finder should return it neither to this person nor that person. Why wouldn't we do that? And it's going to be one of those unusual cases where we're going to be concerned about some kind of a collusion or an unlawful repossession that could cause damage to a third party, neither the giver nor the recipient. Rabbi Abba Bar Memel said, La Kasha, this is not difficult. And now we're on 19b. So this law applies in the case of gift given by a healthy person, and that law applies in the case of gift given by a person on his deathbed. And the Gemara explains, the Mishna that teaches that if the giver says, give it to its intended recipient, the finder must give it. This applies in a case of a gift given by a person on his deathbed who is capable of retracting his gift. Therefore, the finder must give the deed to the recipient. As we say, what is there to say as a reason for not returning the deed? One might suggest that perhaps the giver initially wrote a deed of gift for this person, but then he reconsidered and did not give it to him, and then he wrote a second deed of gift for another person, and thereby gave his property to that other person. And now that his first deed was found, he wishes to retract his gift to that second person to whom he gave the property by dishonestly validating the first deed, right? In order to test the law and how it should be, the standard cases are easy. So that's why they're coming up with these weird, unusual cases. So here you have a guy who wrote a deed of gift. I'm going to give to Reuven my field. And I give it to him. I give him the deed of gift. Now the field is Reuven's, right? But then, I plan to give it to Reuven, but I never give him the document. Right? Is that what we're talking about? Right, exactly. I write up a deed of gift that I'm going to give this field to Reuven, but then I think, you know what? Reuven just spoke rudely to me today, so I'm not going to give it to him. Instead, I'm going to write up another deed of gift, and I'm going to give that field to Shimon. And I give the deed of gift to Shimon, and so now Shimon received that field from me. A few weeks go by. Shimon speaks rudely to me, and I regret that I gave my field to Shimon. Meanwhile, that deed that I wrote up for Reuven and never gave to him, I was carrying it around in my briefcase. A big gust of wind came up. The briefcase fell, and papers fell out and flew away. I didn't even know where they went. And some person finds that original deed of gift that I wrote up but never gave to Reuven, and comes and says, is this your deed of gift that you gave to Reuven? And I say, oh, you know what? If I say that I did give it to Reuven, then that means that I would have given it to Reuven before I gave it to Shimon. And that would mean that the later gift to Shimon was not a valid gift because it wasn't mine to give to Shimon since I had already given it away to Reuven. Now, I'm lying when I say that I gave it to Reuven when it's found and brought back to me. That's a lie. So we're being suspicious that the giver might be telling a lie. Again, sounds like a pretty unusual circumstance. This guy's a generous guy. He's going to give it to one guy. Well, I didn't give it to him, but he did go ahead and give it to another. But whatever, things change. It can be funny, right? So because we have some concern that the person might behave that way, that's why when that deed is found, we don't give, even if the giver says, I gave it to that original guy, we don't give it to him. Rather, we give it to the court, and the court investigates, just to make sure that everything is kosher. Let me just make sure. Yes, exactly. So this attempt to retract the second gift, the one to Shimon, will not succeed. If he gave his property to the recipient of the second deed of gift as a gift, if I made a gift to Shimon, and it was the gift of a healthy person, then the second recipient incurs no loss by the first deed being given to its intended recipient. And this is because when the two deeds are produced in court, the recipient of the later one acquires the property, as the owner evidently retracted the first gift, since one who gave away his property while on his deathbed can subsequently retract his gift. The second recipient acquires the property. And so too if he gave it to the second person as the gift of a person on his deathbed, he incurs no loss. And this is because the recipient of the later deed acquires the property, as the giver evidently retracted his gift to the first recipient. And when the Baraisa teaches that even if both the one who wrote the deed and its intended recipient agree that it is valid, the one who found it should neither return it to this person nor that person, this is referring to the case of a gift given by a healthy person who is not able to retract his gift. Right? Not able to retract, but if you never gave it to him, then there's nothing to retract. Now, therefore, one may not return the deed, as we say that perhaps the giver initially wrote a deed of gift for this person, but then reconsidered and never gave it to him. And then he wrote a second deed of gift for another person, and thereby gave his property to him. And now he wishes to retract his gift to that second person to whom he gave the property, thinking, since I cannot retract the gift legally, I will say to the court that I gave the first deed of gift to this first person, and they will return the deed of gift to him in order that when he produces the deed of gift, which is dated earlier, he will thereby acquire the property. So because we're concerned about this, so we say to the giver, we will not give this document to this person, as perhaps you wrote it but did not give it to him, and then you gave the property to another person, and you now wish to retract your gift to him unlawfully. Therefore, if in fact you did not give this property as a gift to another person, and you wish to return it to the first person, then do the following. Write another deed of gift for him from now and give it to them. So that if you, in other words, I originally wrote this deed of gift for Reuven, I never gave it to him. I wrote another deed of gift for Shimon, I gave it to him. Then the one for Reuven turns up, and I'm claiming that I did give it to Reuven originally, but they're not sure. So the court says to me, okay, just write a deed of gift for Reuven now. You're saying you didn't give it away in the meantime. There was no Shimon. There was no second deed of gift that was given to Shimon. Fine. We're going to guarantee that is the case because you're going to write a new deed of gift to Reuven. And then the field belongs to Reuven. But if it turns out that I'm lying or I forgot that I made that other deed of gift to Shimon, well, Shimon's deed of gift, it has an earlier date on it than this new deed of gift that I would give to Reuven. So that way Shimon doesn't lose out, right? If indeed, Shimon received that gift before this new deed that would give it to Reuven, then Shimon's not going to lose his field. If there is no Shimon, then indeed Reuven will receive the field as he might have in the first place by that deed that I gave him or didn't give him. But certainly he gets it now with this second deed. And Reuven, if you received it in the first place and then you lost it, don't be a schmuck and lose this second replacement deed. Rav Zevid objects to this distinction between the Mishna and the Baraisa, asking, but don't this Mishna and that Baraisa both teach laws with regard to wills? How can Rabbi Abba Bar Memel explain that the Baraisa is referring to the gift of a healthy person? Rather, Rav Zevid said that both this Mishnah and that Baraisa are referring to the gift of a person on his deathbed, and nevertheless, the contradiction between them is not difficult to resolve. This Mishnah is referring to him, the giver himself, who authorizes the return of the will to its intended recipient, and that Baraisa is referring to the case where the giver died, and his son is the one who is authorizing the return of the will. And the Gemara explains, the Mishnah, which indicates that if the giver says, give it to the recipient, the finder must give it to him, is referring to a case where the giver himself authorizes the giving the will, as he is capable of retracting it. one on his deathbed can retract. Therefore, there is no harm in giving the will to the recipient, as we say that even if in the meantime he already gave the property to another person, the latter recipient incurs no loss. And this is because in a case where there are two wills, a first one and a last one, the recipient of the last one acquires the property as the owner evidently retracted his first will. That's why a later will wins. And when the Baraisa teaches that even if both the one who wrote the deed and its intended recipient agree that it is valid, the one who found it should neither return it to this person nor to that person. This is referring to a case where the one who wrote it died, and it is his son who authorizes its return to the recipient. In that case, the deed may not be returned, as we say that perhaps his father wrote the deed of gift for this person and then reconsidered and did not give it to him. And after his father died, the son wrote a deed of gift giving the property to another person and gave it to him. And now the son wishes to retract that gift, thinking, since I cannot retract the gift legally, the gift of a healthy person cannot be retracted, so I will say to the court that my father gave his deed of gift to this first person, and they will return him his deed of gift, and he will then go and appropriate the property from the one who legally acquired the property from me, as he will be successful in acquiring it, and I will divide it with him. Right? It'd be quite a conspiracy, as it were, but just to avoid even the possibility of that, they're going to, issue that same idea. Therefore, we say to the son, we will not give this deed to this person, as perhaps your father wrote it but did not give it to him. And then you gave the property to another person, and now you wish to retract your gift. Rather, if you are telling the truth that your father gave him this property, then you should go now and write another deed of gift for him, so that even if your father did not give him this property and you wrote a deed of gift giving this property to some third party, that third party will incur no loss. And this is because in a case where there are two deeds of gift, a first one and a last one, the recipient of the first one acquires the property, right? First deed of gift wins, last will wins. New subject. The sages taught in a Baraisa, if one found a receipt for payment of a marriage contract, a ketubah, in a case when the wife admits that she received the money from her ex-husband, so then the finder should return it to the husband, right? Because this is a receipt for the payment. If the wife does not admit that the ketubah payment was paid, then the finder should neither return it to the husband nor the wife. In any event, the Baraisa states that when the wife admits that it was paid, one should return the receipt to the husband. And the Gemara asks, but let us suspect that perhaps the wife wrote the receipt intending to give it to the husband in Nisan, but ultimately she did not give it to him until Tishrei. And she went and sold her marriage contract, right, the right to receive money from a marriage contract. She went and sold that for financial advantage in the interim between Nisan and Tishrei. So in other words, she received a sum of money, and in exchange, she agreed that if she were to be divorced or widowed and became entitled to the payment of her marriage contract, the money would belong to the purchaser of the rights to her marriage contract. And then after the couple is divorced, the purchaser collects payment of the marriage contract from the husband, and the husband will produce the receipt that was written in Nisan and will come to repossess property from the purchasers unlawfully. Right? Again, this predating, post-dating problem. So Rava said, and now we're just going to get a start on page 20a, and I'm almost done. So questions or comments, please get them in now. So Rava said, conclude from the fact that this suspicion is not taken into account that the law of Shmuel is accepted. As Shmuel says, in the case of one who sells a promissory note to another, and the seller then forgives the debt of the debtor, it is forgiven, since the debtor essentially had a non-transferable obligation to the creditor alone, and even the creditor's heir can forgive the debt. Therefore, if the wife did engage in the deception mentioned above, it was within her rights, as she is able to forgive the debt of the marriage contract. Now, that's very interesting, right? So if I lend you, right, I lend you $1,000. And so you give me a promissory note that is evidence of the $1,000 obligation that you now have because you have to repay that loan to me. So this promissory note, worth $1,000, right? It's worth the $1,000 that you are going to pay to me. But I could say, you know what? I don't know when you're going to pay me back. It's been a while. I need money today. I'm going to sell it to my friend Reuven for $900. It's worth it to Reuven because he's going to pay $900 and he's going to buy an obligation that's worth $1,000. And I get $900 today, right? So I get my $900. He has the promissory note. So technically now you owe $1,000 to Reuven. So then what if I say, you know what, this $1,000 that you owe me, you know, we get together, we have a great conversation, I feel warm and close to you, and I realize that you really need that $1,000 more than I do, and I say, you know what, forget it. You don't have to pay me. What about Reuven? What about Reuven? Reuven paid me $900 for a promissory note worth $1,000. Do I now have a right to say to you the loan is forgiven? Now Reuven is out $1,000. Answer, yes, I can do that. Reuven will now have a valid action against me and say, Sal, what the heck are you doing? You sold me this promissory note that's worth $1,000 loan, you know, from the person out there in the virtual in our audience. But then you forgave it. And I'll say, yeah, it's true. I did forgive it. So here's your $900 back, right? He has an action against me, but he doesn't have an action against you. That's what we're learning here. And indeed, that is the law. If one sells, this is halacha, if one sells a promissory note to another and later forgives the debt is forgiven and the promissory note is void. And if the person who sold the promissory note died, his heirs are also able to forgive the debt, and this is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. That doesn't mean Reuven is out of luck. It just means that he has an action against me or against my heirs if I'm dead, who actually sold him what became a worthless promissory note because I forgave that debt. But I am able to forgive it. So Abaye said, okay, but in terms of what we were talking about, in terms of found documents, this is not a conclusive proof, even if you say that the law of Shmuel is not accepted. Here we are dealing with a case where the marriage contract emerges from her possession, which indicates that she did not sell it. And Rava disagreed with Abaye and said, if the reason there is no suspicion that she sold her marriage contract is due to the fact that the marriage contract emerged from her possession, because she could have sold the rights without actually selling the document, this reason is insufficient, as we should suspect that perhaps there are two marriage contracts, or perhaps she drew up a separate contract that, you know, when she becomes divorced or her husband dies, then this person can come and make a claim on the marriage contract, but she doesn't actually hand him the marriage contract. She just signed a separate contract. And Abaye said in response, first, we are not concerned about the remote possibility of two marriage contracts. And furthermore, even if there's only one marriage contract which was sold before the receipt was given to the husband, the receipt is valid, as a receipt can be used to repossess property from the time it was written, even if it was given on a later date. And in saying this, Abaye conforms to a standard line of reasoning, as he says that once a monetary document is written for someone, the document's witnesses with their signatures acquire it on his behalf when it's a document that is only to the advantage of this person. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 1. And when we pick this up tomorrow, God willing, at 6 p.m., the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, we'll open Mishnah number 8. Okay, looks like only one comment, and it's from Lucy, who says, not a good idea to predate a document. I think we've seen that over and over again, and we'll call this Lucy's principle. Not a good idea to predate a document. Amen. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific.